This isn't a hula hoop. It's a piece of irrigation tubing that I turned into a hoop. We have literally dozens of ways that we've been using irrigation tubing in our garden this year. We've got a lot more to show, but right now I'm going to use the hoops to support my asparagus that are leaning across my walkway. It's very inexpensive, it's very easy to work with, and it's readily available. So what I'll do is I'll show you how I made this, and I'll show you how I set it up. G'day, I'm Gary. If you've got the space, asparagus is an awesome perennial to grow. I grow it here along the border between my two gardens, so you want to keep it somewhere out of the way. It can live for over 20 years if you take care of it. Right now, I've harvested all that I want to harvest for this year, and I'm letting it grow out. So the ferns have been growing for some time, and the idea is I want to keep as much growth going. That will feed the crown underground, and next year I'll be able to harvest more. So if you don't harvest too much, the crown will get bigger and bigger. Now this is about 8 foot tall, but it's leaning over my walkway. So what I need to do is bundle it up and hold it vertical so I can walk past. I've figured out that I'm going to need a hoop that's about 15 inches in diameter. So I'll tie that around the base, and what I'll do is I'll make the hoop and I'll come back and I'll tie it in. To do this project, you'll need a few simple items. To start off, you'll need the irrigation tubing. We use 1/2 inch irrigation tubing. We buy it in 500 foot rolls, and that costs around $50. It's also available in 50 and 100 foot rolls. A 50 foot roll will cost you $10. A 100 foot roll will cost you around $17.50. There's a few different brands out there. The inside diameter will be 1/2 inch. The OD or outside diameter is going to vary. So the higher the number, the larger the wall thickness. So some of it's going to be more flexible than others. The more you buy, the lower the cost. But if you don't use the whole roll and you put it in your garage, it's going to run the cost up. So you have to decide whether you need 50 to 500 feet. So we're going to use a lot of it. So we go for the larger roll, and that works out about 10 cents a foot. Another thing you'll need are fence posts. There are two different types that are readily available. There's the T-post or star post. I won't be using that. What I will be using is the shorter 5 foot post that has the holes pre-drilled in it. The holes make it easier to attach the hoops to the posts. In our area, they run around $7 a piece. The posts are the most expensive part, but these are a lifetime investment. I've literally been using these for 30 plus years. The material that I use to tie it all together is this rebar tie wire. It costs about $8 to $10 for a 325 foot roll, I think it is. It's very flexible, it's 16 gauge, and it's easily bent with my fingers. You could use a pair of pliers to work on it, but I find it's just quicker and easier for me to use my fingers. The tools that I'm going to use a soldering iron to punch holes in the tubing. You could use a drill. I'm going to use a craft knife and a pair of scissors, and of course pliers and cutters to cut the wire. I've already built this one, so I'm going to just pop it apart. This is about 4 foot long, and it makes a 15-inch hoop. I've got a rough idea on how big I want my hoop. It doesn't have to be perfect. To measure the next piece, I just unroll a little bit. I find it easier to keep these tie wires on. That way it keeps it tidy. So it's just a matter of putting the hoop out. So I want it that big. Then I just simply mark it. To cut it, a good pair of scissors will just cut right through it. as will my craft knife. So I want to join it pretty flush together. So what I do is I cut another piece of tubing, maybe 5 inches in length, with the craft knife. I find the center, cut it away from my hand, turn it around and do the same thing on the other side. So now I've got a tube that's split down the center, and I can roll that up and make a smaller tube. So the smaller tube I can just slide inside the bigger hoop and slide it halfway. Do that on the other side. Bring the two ends together, and that's pretty flush. Then I take my soldering iron, come in about 1 inch, punch all the way through. I would do the same thing if it was a drill. I found the soldering iron, Robbie's idea, works really quick. If I turn it over, I just want to make sure that the holes are big enough. Then I cut a piece of wire, maybe a couple of inches, bend it, slide it through, and fold it over. For the other side, I'll cut another piece. This is ready to go. So instead of putting it through now, I just pop it open. And now I've got a split hoop. Once I've got this together, I've got a couple of these. I'll go over and I'll show you how I tie it in. Okay, I've got my supplies in order. I've got 2 stakes. I'll be putting 2 stakes in. One of them's a really old one and one of them's a new one. If you wanted to, you could use other stakes if you've got them on hand. You could use wooden stakes or even bamboo poles. I prefer to use the steel because the steel's going to last a lifetime. More natural materials tend to rot off at ground level or get eaten by termites here in Southern California. So I prefer to use steel. I've also got my soldering iron, and of course I've got my hoops and I've got my wire, etc. So the first thing I'm going to do is figure out where I'm going to put the stakes in. So I want to pull it towards the fence. So I'll put my stakes in a little bit off to the side. So this one can go in here and try to get it centered. This one can go here. I want to keep the stakes away from the main crown. Now this might damage some of the roots, but hopefully it won't damage the crown too much. The soil here is very shallow and flat. The shale bedrock is about 1 foot below. To provide better drainage, I brought in 1 foot of native clay soil. Asparagus like water, but they don't like sitting in water. It's got probably 8 or 9 inches of broken down wood chips at this point. So that's going to change the pH of the water that's flowing down to the crown. It may not change the pH of the soil below. So our native soil is around 8, 8.5, and asparagus prefer a neutral pH soil, maybe 6.5 to 7. I was told that it may not do well here, but with the wood chips on top, it's done extremely well. So I've got these stakes. I'm going to just tap them in a little bit. They don't have to be that sturdy, just strong enough that if you pull on them, they're not going to go anywhere. So that seems pretty good. It's just enough to support the growth. They're fairly light. So I've got my hoop. So I'll just pull that apart. I'll bundle up all the fronds. I want to try to pull it over that side. So I don't want to damage too much of the growth. So I'll wrap this around under one of the branches. So that'll kind of support it a little bit. And then I can just pop it together, take a small piece of wire, slide it through, fold it over. So I've got my hoop in place. I want to direct the foliage a little bit to anchor the hoop to the stakes. I'm going to pull it up maybe that far. I'll punch a hole through it. Now I'll slide the wire through one of the holes in the stake. So I've got that side done. I want it to lean a little bit more towards the fence. So instead of having it central, I can pull it back a little more, and I'll put a hole on the other side. Got another piece of wire, wrap it around, and that's going to hold it in place. So that's not going to really slide up and down. This one here is going to support it, and that's it, that's out of the way. If I wanted to go taller, I can always attach something to the top of the post and lift this up higher and put another ring in. For now, that's leaning towards my dragon fruit and my wall. I'll do the same with this one. With everything clear and tidy, I'm able to maintain my plants. I fertilise twice a year. When the growth has been cut back in late winter, I'll come through and I'll fertilise. And again, I'll fertilise now that the plant's starting to fern out. So I'm using composted chicken manure and leaf mould. This is high in nitrogen. They do like a nitrogen feed because they are a leafy green. So I just scatter a bit around the crown. I don't need to put a lot in. If we have rain, that will water it in. If not, it will water in as I water. Having them up also makes it easier to weed. By removing the weeds, they're going to have less competition. With the wood chips, I really don't have a lot of weeds, but I do get a couple of things that come up, and I can pull those very easily. If you really wanted to, you could remove the berries and the flowers. Normally I just leave them be. I don't think they're large enough to significantly impact the growth of the plant. The berries are about 1/4 of an inch, maybe 3/16 in diameter, and the flowers are very insignificant too. By leaving them to go to seed, I end up with more plants. So I've got a plant that came up here 2 years ago, and I've got another one that came up here last year. So this is a year-old plant, and by leaving it to go to seed, I'm going to have more plants. So I'm planning for the future. You could use these hoops for a lot of other different things to support. I use it on my cannas. I use it on one of my aramophilas or emu bushes. Anything that has a real high vertical growth but tends to topple, you could even use it in your ornamental grasses if you wanted to. Anyhow, that's pretty much it for this video. If you'd like to leave a comment, or if you've got any other ideas of how to use the hoops, please feel free to leave a comment. With that, thanks for watching, and don't forget to eat what you grow. Goodbye.